Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back to the Let's Actuate podcast. We got a fun guest for you all today. Today we've got Bayo Okusanya with us. He's a founder and CEO of NPC Labs, as well as a CIO and co-founder of an AI edtech startup called ENOX. Started his career as a first hire at Shock Ventures, which is an early stage tech focused VC fund that invests throughout the global Princeton University alumni network. Now, he contributed to several early stage startups as an angel investor and advisor, and he currently serves as a co-host on the Blitz Scaling a Startup podcast, where he shares insights with young entrepreneurs, investors, and first-time founders. Thank you for joining us today, Bayo, and welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Thank you as well, Chris. Always good to connect with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bayo here and us, we've been in a handful of conversations over the past couple months. I'm got to say, I've had the pleasure of getting to know him through collaboration. But what I'd like to do is just a little bit different than what we've been doing, which is more of an interview style, and just hand over the mic to Bayo because he's got a lot going on, and it's some pretty interesting stuff in some of these really emerging spaces. So take the mic, Bayo, and let us know what's happening.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate the platform. I've been for the longest time interested in emerging technologies, particularly blockchain and AI. We were putting on conferences to talk about AI safety in 2016 at Princeton, right? So we've been thinking about these technologies for some time now. Right now, I'm working on two different companies. One is NPC Labs. We leverage blockchain technology to help artists distribute their IP and secure it. The way we do this is through products that are phygital, meaning they come with a digital and physical component to it. So we have a network of white label product suppliers. We work with different brands and their IP, up and coming artists and creators as well, to find the right product for their community. And then we attach NFTs to those products in order to distribute them and create a deeper relationship and connection with their community members. So it's like owning a piece of the brand. And that can give you access to different experiences and token gated activations that the brand activates through our ecosystem. And then we also have through ENOX, an AI edtech company where we're leveraging AI avatars and AI generated course curriculums in order to teach and empower the world. So we have relationships with K through 12 education providers, organizations. We also work with prison populations and prison reform organizations to get this education into the hands of underserved communities where it's most needed. We, have been working to turn this on, like I said, in prisons first, because these courses can actually lead to high school diplomas for these inmates and then can help them transition back into society and reduce recidivism, which is the tendency to return back, to prison after leaving. So, we want these technologies to be in the hands of the people that really need it most. So that's what I've been focused on the past few years.
Very, very cool. And I love the fact that the initiatives themselves seem grounded in altruism with the intention of really contributing value back to the future as a whole, which is pretty cool from the very beginning and also from new beginnings.
100%, right. Whenever there's a new tech revolution, there's a lot of people that get left behind. And, for the first time, I think the community of developers, scientists, engineers, and researchers belong to many different communities and have, a bit of a say in how these things are deployed and where the impact is held, right? So in a lot of ways, like we eliminate bias in management, which helps us, access different opportunities than other groups might be able to. And that's important because there's going to be a lot of economic development as a result of these tools.
Yeah.
And there's going to be segments of the population that just won't know what's happening. So we want to make sure
Yeah.
that people get exposure to this technology and it's done in a responsible way.
Let's talk about that a little bit. What do you think the balance looks like between economic development and innovation, especially with such a disruptive and new technology versus societal disruption and people that get lost in the reaction to the situation versus like the immersion and adoption of it?
I mean, that's a great question because, technology is sort of like Pandora's box. Like once someone invented how to start a fire, it's hard to put it out. So understanding that these new modalities are going to be introduced anyway, I think the first thing to do is democratize the access to them, right? Like expose people to it, educate them. That's a lot of what we're doing at ENOX, like upskilling people on the ground to be ready for this revolution, but also, you know, um, train them how to leverage it in their workplace and in their daily lives, so that they can actually start taking advantage of the efficiencies, right? Like, on a recent pod I was watching with Sam Altman, he said that, like, we're probably living in a time of the first one person $1 billion company. And imagine what that must be like when, there's a certain segment of the population that doesn't even know that this technology exists. So, yeah, I think once people have access to the information, access to the tech, like it's up to them. They get a certain agency
Yeah.
to implement like these technologies into their workflows. And that's really, I think, the responsibility of us as people who are early adopters to be good stewards,
Mm.
in order to share what's happening and share insight and create content, right? And, help facilitate that transition for many others that come after us. And I think if you do that well, you can also take advantage of the benefits, right, that are coming about because of this. I've already implemented this in my workflows and in my businesses to great effect.
Very cool. Um, when it comes to that, so it's interesting that on one end you're helping with the expanding the dynamism of education, either out to the masses or in these isolated environments where people can really like learn the tech through engaging with it, but also learn about the tech through the platform, which is cool. And then on the other end, you're enabling the mass utilization of this technology too through your primary company with NPC Labs, which I think is really interesting when it comes to the term phygital, which I think those of us that are immersed kind of understand what that is, but that translation aspect to and from the digital and the physical world is really interesting. Can you talk to us more about what you're doing now and what that initial engagement is, and where you see it going over? We'll throw a wild card: the next 5 years, let alone the next 10.
Yeah, that's a great segue. So at MPC, we work with a lot of businesses that create capital almost out of thin air, right? They're imagining things, and then it turns into IP, put into a form factor that community members can enjoy, and then it creates community, and they're able to monetize that community in some form or fashion. So we see that happening across every platform now, whether it's the podcasting space, newsletter writers, influencers, artists, athletes, YouTubers, right? People are building these massive communities, and then, through their own creation and through the creative process, are able to develop this massive impact in culture. So
Mm-hmm.
how, do you capture that impact, and how do you make sure that the economics of what's being created is actually going back to you as a creative or a business?
Mm.
And that's what I see, blockchain being able to track and manage for the long tail of the creative community, particularly if AI is essentially, you know, being trained on people's copyrighted content and material. A few days ago, a friend of mine posted an article about this tool called Nightshade, that was released by University of Chicago researchers that allowed artists to hide their data in AI models. So the data would
Mm.
actually be invisible to the AI model, and they could essentially roll this out for all their work. Because these models right now, because of, I guess it's early on and it's the wild wild west, they're just training on whatever data they can find online, and it's a race. It's like the new oil rush, right? Who can ingest the
Mm.
most data and have the most advanced model. We've already seen like lawsuits from companies like Getty Images for finding their images in the generative AI
Okay.
text to picture tools that are being released in the past year. So, I see blockchain as a solution that allows people to manage IP, and track who owns what and when. It's like a transparent database that's immutable, right? It can't be changed by any one player in the ecosystem. And because of that, we'll be able to have people opt in or opt out on how their and data is being used and leveraged
Mm.
in the marketplace. So that's the promise, right, of blockchain technology. There's still work that needs to be done, but the way we're leveraging this right now and introducing people to this is, by first helping brands and communities that already have the IP, right? They
Mm-hmm.
already have valuable IP. They've built massive communities online. Those communities are transitioning into physical spaces through events and conferences, and we're going to these brands and we're saying to them, we'll help you scale a product like traditional e-commerce, but this product will also be more than a product for your community members. It'll be an access pass to the next event. It'll be a ticket. It'll be a token gated experience to exclusive content, perks, rewards, and benefits that exists only within your ecosystem. And then if you look at like the biggest brands on earth, they're already catching on to this, like LVMH with Louis Vuitton and what they're doing, Disney and the Flow blockchain releasing collectibles for Disney's IP. Warner Bros. Is doing the same thing with platforms like Vivi. And it's because, like, these are IP giants. So they're always looking for different channels to work their IP and make it more valuable. You might have noticed too that like some of these studios are working into their contracts that these, the actors and the people that have their likenesses within these productions,
Mm-hmm.
and essentially have AI replicate their likeness in perpetuity, and that
Mm-hmm.
created the whole writer strike. And it's some of the residual. I mean, it didn't create like the whole thing, but it's that disparate motivations between like the management of the IP and the people who go to and contribute it and work, to create it. So I think that's going to continuously be an issue that, these technologies are going to be up against. And we just wanted to add some clarity into the ecosystem by providing like the infrastructure for these artists and brands to navigate this landscape, and leverage these tools to build like, an economy around their IP.
Very cool. Yeah. Chris, I'd love some of your thoughts on this as well, and where you see this trajectory. So with things like what Bayo is working on, where it's kind of that initial gateway and the intention to empower these individual creators and secure IP and really identity, secure, protect
Yeah.
identity moving forward as well. But I know you've had some thoughts on the space.
I think one of the key things that we're going to be looking out for in the next few years, going into the next decade, is the reshaping of what identity means to artists. Just like how we can look back in time to the remix culture of the 80s and 90s, and it is simply a rhyme of what early artists in the 1900s were experiencing when the first recordings were going out. To study those histories, and there's an excellent 99PI, 99% Invisible podcast on that very subject, and we'll link it in the description of our podcast. That essentially, almost verbatim, sounds like today's arguments, but the critical difference between what we're seeing today with remix culture or sampling or just recording is deconstructing humanity's uniqueness that we felt was unique. What was our identity? The joke is among many AI and ML enthusiasts, when you look at things like the Jetsons, is that the future today, 2024, we would have Rosie the robot doing the laundry and things. And instead, robotics seems to be one of the hardest, and locomotion seems to be the hardest artificial intelligence problems. And creativity is actually the easiest. We are experiencing an existential crisis as humans. So where we want to make sure that we have a foothold is building the framework for what we capture as identity. I don't have the answers in terms of like where we'll be going, but I'm very certain that one of the challenges we'll be seeing is what is identity and how that reveals more about ourselves in the coming years. If not forever, right?
Yeah, and with some semblance or residue of the effects and impacts and decisions today, right? And that's really interesting too when it comes to like rethinking identity as a whole. So kind of protecting that, but you also get into the just throw gas on this fire. What is creativity? What is expression? Especially from an artist's perspective or a creator's perspective, having some sense of identity through that expression and through that creation. And there is a healthy segmentation of that too. There's segmentation from that as well. But when you're a part of the creation process, there's a part of you in something. It's my belief, right? So you walk this really fine razor line, even when it gets into the creation process, right? So talking about leveraging these technologies and using them as tools and as vehicles for that expression and for that co-creation, whether it is as an artist or whether it is as a particular creator or writer, or even just a producer, like somebody that's running a business in a certain way. I remember when we were out in Utah a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to an individual who's building a business around automation and things like that, and he was talking about scaling. I asked him how it is with team building, and he goes, "Well, I'm building my own team by making new members as I need them." So he's literally creating an ecosystem to build businesses by generating up new AIs and agents to fill those roles. And that's his relationship with the creation process in creating the business. Now, the tangibility, the scalability of that, not going to poke that bear. But it's really interesting to see all of the directions it's going. It makes it really hard to have some semblance of a stable prediction or trajectory that is more based on likelihood than not. I think some of them you probably can when it comes to like workload and automation and like the supporting roles that we're already seen very practical applications of, but like how scalable is it to have, like you were saying earlier, we might be in the age of the first $1 billion one person run startup. If you've created all of that yourself through with these tools and these resources, is that something that we even want to accept? Like touching into that identity crisis that we're starting to dip into. So it's really, really, really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's levels to creativity, right? There's taking an existing process and making it better. That can be creative. And I'm not like a patent attorney, but there might be some protective measures you could put for doing like processes in new ways. And then there's like, originality as well is, doing something different than anybody else has done it, which is probably not how most people are creative, right? I think, that might be like rarer. I think we need systems to protect both of these types of individuals. And then I also think like, there's parts of me that think that you can't ever stop people from like having access and leveraging their access however they see fit, right? Like, some people are pessimistic about being able to, for example, stop AI from essentially running uh, running off track, and just once you take like the lid off the pot, it just can't be put back on. And I'm more of an optimistic builder where it's like I'll just focus on building the things that I want to see in the world. It's hard to predict how things will unfold, but if I think there's more of this, then I, be happier, right? I'd be able to go to sleep knowing that like future generations have the right solutions and the right infrastructure to manage a crisis in times of crisis and things. And, I think that's where I've come to as an entrepreneur, where it's like, all right, let me just think through how I would want to leverage this technology and implement those solutions. And I'm sure there's going to be other interpretations that people will bring about, other ways of looking at things. Like I know there's, a very, I forget what they call themselves, but like almost technocratic view of this space where people want, AI at all costs. This is the evolution. Humans are outdated tech. But I tend to see it as a way to optimize our skill sets, right? And a way to leverage it to enhance and make life easier, better, for most people on Earth. If we can do that, then we're in a good spot. But yeah, it could go anyway. It could go anyway at this point. I think we're in that point in history.
Yeah, for sure. And I was listening to a podcast a while ago where they were discussing, I think it was something like, we'll link it below, but it was something like when chatbots take over the world, or when chatbots rule the world or something, where the individual is talking about the ease of access. So kind of touching on like the democratization of access. There's going to be like negative players that enter the space. But the hypothesis is when access is democratized and there's a level playing field, sure, you are going to see a rise of that. But at the same time, to offset that, you have the enablement and the empowerment of people in society at large to have better and more advanced self-protection mechanisms in place, and deeper awareness and knowledge, so that kind of carry that with them. So it's like this ongoing balance, right, in evolution of society and of technology. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and we had a similar conversation with a gentleman out at Utah Tech Week. His name was
Mm-hmm.
Dan. The conversation essentially went, we should look at tools as a way to reflect on ourselves, whether it be the hammer. What do these things reveal more about our humanity? We should not necessarily be afraid of them. They are, at the end of the day, tools, no matter how seemingly complex. And when you think about the pushback that even ATMs had in the 80s, the conversation was, oh, what will happen with all these jobs?
Mm.
I can't imagine a world without a teller. And it turns out that there weren't mass layoffs. Instead, those people moved into being, they were up-leveled and upskilled. Yep. We actually created more jobs because we freed up certain levels of tedium. And there's a grand idea, and I'm optimistic or hopeful that it will be true, that AI will free us from certain things. And although we're seeing some chaos right now, and I certainly don't like that in the market, the time will pass, and we will see a resurgence or an evolution of certain tasks that are more suited for what makes us as humans better. There is a worry that I saw in the automotive industry that less to do with the current generative AI, but the more the machine learning and vision space for self-driving vehicles, is that we essentially have an entire classification of jobs, not in the US, but the world, throughout all of human history. And that's a form of portership. Who transfers goods? And we have never had a technology that was so much a threat to an entire classification of jobs. That is probably one of the more interesting conversations that are coming up. It is less to do about the immediacy of the jobs, but we have never faced a threat to a classification of jobs. What will happen to us as humans, as people? Where will they go? How will they be upskilled or leveled? Or will we not solve that and it's actually detrimental? But how we solve these problems is a reflection of ourselves. And it's not something that we have to fear the tools. No one here is saying, oh, the democratization of communication through technologies like low Earth orbit, satellite, internet satellite, bringing unabridged internet connections to places that have more authoritarian regimes. No one says, oh, we need to stop. Right? We emphatically say more, faster. Take the lid off. Right? We have an instinct of what is actually good with some of these aspects of technology. So I'm just being optimistic. I think we will be in a better place, but we should always be mindful of where we're going.
Yeah. Two things come to mind there, Chris. I think that, we should remain optimistic. I do think that there's going to be some flight to like anti-AI rhetoric and tools, like ways to almost like a cybersecurity revolution for people who see dangers in AI and want to minimize those dangers. Like something like the tool I mentioned earlier with Nightshade as an example. I didn't think that AI could be combated in a way that makes sense for people, and they could leverage to like protect themselves if they feel threatened by AI systems. But it seems like there's research along that line of reasoning now too. And then I also think there's an opportunity here for people who do feel like they will be displaced or be, made redundant by AI to create, right? And like I know that not everyone is entrepreneurial by nature, but I do think that um, there are opportunities more than ever to be, right? And the people who can find they're fit with these opportunities are going to have like outsized results this decade. So, this is like one of the first times. I know we've said it at earlier states in like the information age, but this really is one of the first times that a small team can compete with a large enterprise and win, and that's I want to say a good development as far as democracy is concerned,
Yeah.
and some of the ideals we care about, in this country and other countries that look up to countries like the U.S.
Yeah.
So, hopefully, like people find that empowering. Um, you'd be surprised how some of these big companies are finding it hard to really make sense of what's going on. And I'm surprised too. You'd expect like everyone to have an AI department at this point, but there's like, you know, AI consultants, right? And people out there who are helping these companies upskill, and they had just a computer in a dream and did all
Yeah.
this research themselves, right? People like Vincent, right, at ENOX.
Yep.
I see, lots of opportunities for individuals to move past whatever limitations were set on them a decade ago just by chance. Like we're starting to even out the playing field with access in new interesting ways.
Yeah. And on that note, to kind of string together where the conversation came from too, I think a lot of the fear also probably comes from, I don't know if this has really been acknowledged at scale, but the perception or the belief of a further lack of control. But the irony is, at the same time, talking about leveling the playing field, I think it's kind of the opposite, where people are empowered now more than ever to potentially have even deeper control over their future and the potential that they have to move forward in interacting with the world. So it's a really interesting dichotomy to be aware of. And talking about these wild times where you are empowered, there is a sense that there's a tremendous amount of resources. You can kind of create your own future. There's 100 different avenues to do that. There's tools that literally give you superpowers, like super perception and thinking and analysis that you can kind of take control of. And at the same time, there is this aspect of a loss of control in some regard over the outcome. So it's like this interesting balance. And talking about that interesting balance, I think, is something that entrepreneurs very often navigate, even from before this technological shift. So I'd love to hear what that balancing act looks like from somebody like yourself, Bayo, who's a co-founder of not just one company in these times, implementing this trend-setting and disruptive technology, but two of them.
Yeah, it's sort of like if I had to, it's sort of like school in the sense that you start with no understanding of the landscape, and then you dig into each subject, and you realize there's a whole world underneath, and you can never really finish learning, but you can get better and you can level up. That's sort of how I
Mm.
feel navigating through these waters, because I do have some engineering background, right? I studied engineering my freshman year at Princeton, and then I transitioned into studying like how technology companies get built as a VC.
Hmm.
But like there's just so much research coming out every single day that it's hard to keep track of what's happening. So I
Hmm.
start with business problems. Like, how can AI be applied to solve this business problem? It could be as simple as, I need a product description, right? And this was actually how I started implementing AI in some of my workflow. It's like for simple things
Mm,
like that, where, I have high level detail, but I need to string it together coherently and quickly,
mm,
right? For, let's say, a database of information, I can use AI to bring it all together coherently for customers. And then, like, that's just scratching the surface of what you can do. And now you have people creating AI agents that replace whole functions and roles, like a sales team. And I'm, still scratching the surface of those technologies every day, but almost taking a step back and looking in, we've built a lot of where we're at with MPC with only a 3-person team, right? Internationally, mostly remote. And then, a handful of contractors to fill in certain roles and positions, and a
mm,
network of partners and core advisors. Um, so much so that, you know, even working across many different time zones, we're able to, create a symphony, right, of complex collaboration to bring this all together. And that's just on the infrastructure of like decades of internet, right, progress. And, we couldn't create a remote first company, not even in like 2015 at the scale that
mm-hmm.
we can do it today. So understanding that, you realize that, the evolution of tech and business is like a gradual process that, the entire landscape is going through simultaneously. And you've just got to figure out where you can leverage these tools, because they're only going to, they're, this is the worst they're ever going to be, essentially.
Yeah, which is
So
wild.
yeah. And I reminded myself of that every day. And I'm also looking for opportunities for cross pollination here, where, what ENOX is doing can leverage what MPC is doing, and, vice
Yes.
versa, right? ENOX creates AI avatars. We can definitely input that into the digital layer of these products, to great effect, right? We can use artist likenesses in order to, you know, create deeper relationships and connections with their community, teach them. Um, we could spread blockchain education through a platform like ENOX. So I am looking for the opportunities of cross pollination here, where, what we're doing on both sides of the coin can, be mutually beneficial and work together. Yeah, that's how I think about these things.
Cool. I share the
Yeah.
same belief. And one of the things that we're doing with Actuate Ventures, with the companies that we choose to run through the studio or traditionally invest in, or even just advise on and collaborate with, we want to be symbiotic in nature, right? Because like creating the future, if we do it alone and siloed like we have been, we're going to end up in a future that looks a lot like it does now, and just with new and shinier tech. Maybe a little worse off in some spots, a little rough in some spots. But we're not. We're not. I don't believe that we're going to make the leaps and bounds that we should be making, or that we could be making, if we were literally co-creating together. So looking in any problem space and wondering, like, hey, how can I connect the dots here and string together multiple aspects of innovation and creative minds that are solving not just the same problem, but related and or tangential problems. I think we're moving in the right direction there. So that feels really good to hear and to know, that I think that's starting to spread as an approach to scale. It's existed, right? It's where you get JVs and partnerships, but I don't know, maybe from a not having been deep in it perspective from before, felt maybe like there's always some sort of like, hey, what's in it for me sort of approach versus what's in it for the world if we join forces and do something, because it can have a much deeper and broader impact that way. So that's really cool to hear. And one
Yeah.
of the things I love too, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say one of the other things that I love too, and one of the whole purposes of this thing, because there's so much information that's out there, and you kind of answered the question before I got to ask it, but I want to highlight it again. There's so much information. There's so many choices that could be made. There's so many different avenues to move forward. There has been, and now it's even further quantified with all these avenues. It's easy to get paralyzed. It's easy to play, like tell yourself the story that you don't know enough, or you're not sure what actions to take with all the information that you do know now. And I think that's one of the key aspects that you're doing differently that people could learn from is how to apply and translate that information. First off, applying the information that you learn, right? So you actively seek out how the new knowledge that you've had can be implemented in problem spaces, whether the ones you're in or even beside. And how do you translate this information into action?
Yeah, I appreciate the feedback there, because sometimes you don't know if you're doing it right. So it's always good to hear those affirmations, right? Because there's really not one blueprint to get any of this done. And I do see a trend, like you mentioned earlier, towards competitive collaboration. And I think part of it is like there's a whole open source versus closed, source ecosystem conversation that's happening on the internet, as well as like a tend toward decentralization that's happening. And I think, and a general like anti, big tech, anti centralization sentiment that seems to be spreading, that's probably helping smaller players in these spaces band together to like create an internet that's less siloed and more collaborative in general. And I'm here for it. It's I think I'm part of that trend by nature. So, and maybe it's a generational thing too.
Yep.
But I think a lot of people that I see younger than even me are thinking in the same way. Yeah, because the things that we're up against. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and one of the things too that you just mentioned, and kind of like appreciating the feedback. You never really know if you're doing things right. I think that's the whole point, right? Of the power of that approach and doing things together. You have a support system in it, but doing something, you then have the situations where you're afforded feedback and validation, and you actually get that friction, but all that information could then be used to refine your approach and your assumptions and the actions that you're taking. And if you're doing that together with other people that are either working on the same problem space or tangential problem spaces, it's incredible how quickly you can move as well, and how I don't know, the space of innovation seems to expand in environments like that. And I'm going to quote you because I love how you articulated it before. In the space of the symphony of complex collaboration. Awesome.
Yeah, I might print that on a T-shirt.
Send me one, even a hat.
Yeah.
I will wear it. Very cool. I'd love to bring you back on to talk tech and VC, because that in itself is an hour and a half long conversation. But navigating this space as an entrepreneur in this new tech and with VC, what are some actions that you're currently focused on right now? What are some problems that you're trying to solve, or that you're noticing at a large scale that maybe you're not trying to solve yet, that people should keep in mind or can learn from, or can even join you on?
In my daily role, you're referring to?
Take the question as you will, in your daily role or just in your place in the the larger ecosystem that we're in.
Yeah. I think one interesting challenge that I've noticed in my both VC career and career as a founder so far is finding the right sources of capital, right? And I think now more than there was in the 90s and early 2000s when Silicon Valley was first getting started, there's many different sources of capital. There's all sorts of crowdfunding and all sorts of private capital raising mechanisms, right? As well as ways to raise money from customers and retail customers, and particularly being in this blockchain ecosystem that's emerging, like there's a lot of push towards, you know, finding ways to raise capital from the community as well, right? Which, there's easier methods of doing that now and easier models and blueprints that you could follow with other different types of projects, companies, and organizations that are getting started. So I've been able to be thoughtful about that because I've been a VC and have, seen companies come and go that didn't quite understand the VC model. And that created misalignment between the founder and the investor, and then the LPs, right? That I think could have been addressed had there been more communication and information sharing, as well as expectation setting. Because what a lot of people don't understand is that when VCs invest in a tech company, they're investing in the potential to, generate like $1 billion outcomes. And, that's built into the model of the VC infrastructure. So as a founder, you have to understand that and, build a company that, meets those expectations. If that's not what you want to do, there's other sources of capital out there now that you can explore. There's all sorts of crowdfunding, raising from friends and family. And then there's even, being able to bootstrap and sell to customers, right, as a pathway towards building a sustainable company. And a company that's still capable of raising capital from investors at a different timeline. And I think, understanding the nuances of that can help a lot of founders who have like almost like a cold start issue with not having financing, right? But then also needing financing to build and start generating revenue. And I think, as you've probably seen with how we've, worked on NPC and ENOX, we're not constrained by not yet having the traditional VC financing fulfilled round, right? We're still in the process of doing those things, but we're still generating revenue, right? And I think that's because we've been able to be thoughtful about how we, build out the customer pipeline. And also, 2023 was like probably one of the hardest years ever to try and raise VC capital. So the companies that were able to adapt and live through that period, right, are going to be very successful this year and I think going forward, because the capital markets are getting back to pre 2020, pre pandemic, let's say, hype, right? And there's all these new emerging verticals that are coming that people are getting excited about, that institutional investors are excited about. So I think that was like my education from 2023. Because VC like went through the ringer as an asset class like the entire
Yeah,
year.
it did.
Yeah.
Yep.
So huge learning there.
Yep. It's still getting slammed.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the way of the future to understanding like how to leverage the financing that's out there, whether it's grant programs, government grant programs and corporate grants, as well as like there's that capital. There's all sorts of capital out there. Some of these are forgivable, right? And some of them come with their own stipulations, but it's out there. It's out there, and there's allocations out there if you're looking to do the research.
Yeah, and I think that was a really great note to add to that list that we just started there too. When it comes to crowdfunding and tapping into a community that you're serving, I think that ties very nicely in to bootstrapping, just getting your company to a point of revenue generation. There's a bunch of creative ways to do that as well. It's one of the strongest ways to build a business is serving the problem space that you're intending to as soon as possible and scaling from there for sure. And then even in this dynamic of things, when we're talking about co-building the future together, there are a ton of very creative, like strategic partnerships where you can join forces with people that are building innovative solutions in the space as well. And it might just be the intersection of those two things in solving a specific or tangential problem spaces that really unlocks those opportunities and that potential to scale. And with the access that we have these days to like direct access that we have to people, to the problem points, and to the resources to support them. It's a good mix. So for anybody that didn't make it through the past couple of years, no idea what the ride might have been like, but definitely pick up the baton. There are tools in the shed, and there are people armed and ready to go and active in the space. So make sure to persevere for sure.
Yeah,
Very
100%.
cool. Awesome. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Bayo. And how would you like people to connect with you? Where can they engage? Where can they reach out? We'll leave all the links below. But just while we wrap up.
Yeah. So I'm on all platforms. If you go to Passion Fruit, that is with two O's, FROOT, passionfruit.me/bio, BAYO. You'll find all my different platforms, content that we've created for different newsletters, articles, past clips from interviews that you can access to learn more about what we're building. And, don't be a stranger, reach out on LinkedIn, Twitter. You'll also find it on that link. I'm also, I have a personal website where you'll learn more about like different startups I've been blessed enough to participate and support, as well as ebooks, blog posts, and other juicy content that you can engage with.
Very cool. Yeah, I've dove into some of the blog posts that you've written, and great reading. So definitely be sure to check that out.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. So contribute to the symphony of complex collaboration, everyone. Get out there. Let's build the future together. If you find yourself in an overload of information, look for a problem space that's close to your heart. Apply some of the new knowledge that you have. Pair with somebody that's in the space solving it, and solve it together. And reach out to Bayo if there's any intersection or potential for innovation as well, because it's doing some pretty cool stuff, and I'm very excited for what the next year is going to bring for you all.
Me too. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, everybody, as we started, good day, good afternoon, good evening to you. Get out there, make something, build something, join forces, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.